I'd like to begin now with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation from whose lands this is being broadcast today and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands where you are joining us from today. Feel free, if you wish, to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box if you would like to do that. And now I'd like to introduce our guest for today, Anna Burkey. Anna Burkey is the head of Australia Reads, a national not-for-profit on a mission to get more Australians reading more books more often. Hailing from Scotland, where she was on the founding team of Edinburgh's UNESCO City of Literature, she currently lives on Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung lands. After several years in leadership roles with organisations such as the State Library of Victoria and leading the Centre for Youth Literature and establishing the Children's Quarter, Anna is now working with partners across the country to grow Australia Reads, secure investment in reading and increase national reading rates. Anna herself has always been keen to connect with bookish colleagues and happy to share the inside story of the many engagement programs she's been a part of, from the trickier and stickier aspects to the more heartwarming moments, some of which we're going to hear about today. Anna, welcome to First Friday.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's really great to be here, and I am indeed calling you from Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung land today, which is otherwise known as Brunswick.
Otherwise know it as. Okay, and we always start with the same question, which is to quote a famous songwriter, how did I get here? How did you arrive where you are?
Because it's been a bit of a journey from what you've just read out there. There's been a little bit along the way. And I think when I look back, and particularly when I talk to students about how I have ended up where I am with Australia Reads, it can sound like a very neat journey and that everything was very logical along the way. And it absolutely hasn't felt like that when you're in the process. Instead, it's a little bit more like, oh, there's a shiny thing. Let's go over there and see what we can do. But I think that the thread and the guiding light that has really brought me here is that I love books. I'm a complete bookworm. I love stories. I love talking with people about stories. And that led me to study English at the University of Edinburgh. And then that led me into the wider book world and the industry that sits alongside reading, whether that's the library side of things or whether that's the kind of publishing, writing, author side of things. And along the way, I've had the great fortune to work with a lot of those different agencies and lots of different kinds of people who are running really fantastic programs, and to look at the fragility in essence of running not-for-profit reading programs. It can be precarious. And I've had the good fortune to see how other countries have approached how they get more people to read. And so when I came over here to manage the Centre for Youth Literature from overseas, that precariousness here in Australia was really evident, that there are some incredible organisations and so much was reliant on volunteers or small amounts of grant funding, whereas Australia is a really wealthy country. So what can we actually do to get significant major investment to support people to read more in this country is a drop in the ocean compared to what the health budget is, or the education budget, or the defence budget, for example. So I guess along the way, Andrew, I've always just been interested in how do we solve that problem to get more people to read? And that has what has led me through all those different programs over in Scotland and the UK. Very brief stint in Cape Town, which was amazing. And then to end up here in Melbourne for the last 13 years. And for the last couple of years, looking at how we bring all of this advocacy together under the banner that we now call Australia Reads. So, and then finding time to read along the way and keeping up to date. At the moment, I've got in my head very much like what's going to be big this Christmas, so that I can get all my Christmas reading recommendations out along the way.
Out there. Speaking of reading recommendations and advocacy, obviously you bring an international scope. And before we do get to Australia Reads, Cities of Literature, Edinburgh.
Yes.
What is a city of literature, and what sort of impact can it have to be designated that by UNESCO?
It was, well, the early conversations sound a little like a caricature in some ways, because it was genuinely a meeting in a pub between the head of the Edinburgh International Book Festival, the controller of BBC Radio 4, Ian Rankin, now Sir Ian Rankin, the author, and the head of the Publishers Association. And they were having some whiskies and they said, Edinburgh's amazing. Why doesn't anyone notice that on a global scale? We should be some sort of world city of literature. Let's go and tell the minister this. The Minister for the Arts, quite approachable in Scotland, and said, that's a great idea, go and talk to UNESCO. So they literally did. They got on a plane with a bagpiper who only played outside. Those of you who've heard indoor bagpipes will be relieved to hear. They went to the UNESCO general meeting, and they made this case that there should be some form of recognition. UNESCO recognizes tangible built heritage at that stage, the buildings, the architecture, but at that point didn't recognize cultural heritage that was intangible, that you can't touch. And so they said there should be some form of network of cities that have incredible depth in these creative and cultural areas. And we think literature should be one of them, and we think Edinburgh should be the first of them all. And UNESCO literally turned around and said, that is a fantastic idea. We're going to make the UNESCO Creative Cities Network. You're the first one. Go home and work out what it means and tell us. Beautiful. So they came back, they gave us a medal, and came back off the plane with this medal and said, now we need to work out what this is. And so there was one city of literature, and I believe that there are more like 50 cities of literature now. There are also cities of design, of film, of music, of folk art. And so there are hundreds of these cities now, and they have dedicated teams that are there to raise the profile of their art form and to collaborate internationally. So for us in Edinburgh, what it allowed us to do tangibly was to have a conversation with business leaders, with the leaders of other cultural organizations, with citizens, to say, you live in a really beautiful literary place. We want to make this visible to you. So, for example, we worked with property developers who would have buildings that weren't ready to be knocked down yet. So just really ugly, just sitting there in the center of this beautiful city, looking awful. And so we worked with them to put basically stickers. The whole building was covered in literature. So we used quotes from, on that first one, we used quotes from different authors. So we used a quote from Trainspotting, a quote from Alexander McCall Smith, and then we also used a quote from Oscar Wilde that said, Edinburgh is quite lovely, bits of it. Now this was 14 feet high on a building. Each floor got a quote, and it was a 14-story building. It's quite impressive that we made it happen. They were completely fine with all the quotes in the council, including the Trainspotting one, but not the Oscar Wilde one, because they thought it made Edinburgh sound dodgy. I was like, but it's fun, it's funny. So we kept it in the end, and that was up there for 2 years. When that building was eventually brought down, people missed having the words around them. And so the station, which is called Waverley, named after the Walter Scott book, is now to this day covered in quotes from Walter Scott. It's etched on the glass, it's stuck on decals all around the station. There's stickers on the floor that have excerpts from the book. There are parts of Edinburgh, for those of you who've been, that have got quotes chiseled in the paving stones. The wall of the Parliament has a poetry wall made out of different types of stone that are found across Scotland. So there's quartz and there's basalt, and that is chiseled in to the fabric of Edinburgh, a celebration of words. And then we did a whole bunch of engagement work. So we did projected poetry, we projected stories, because it gets dark at 3 o'clock in Edinburgh in the winter. So we were about making it visible, making it fun. We ran One Book, One Edinburgh, a citywide reading campaign, so everyone read the same book at the same time. And we chose Robert Louis Stevenson to begin that because everyone at the time thought he was American, and he's very much Scottish, very an Edinburgh author. And so it was about helping the city reclaim that visibility. And different cities now have done all kinds of different initiatives and activations to improve the visibility for their citizens. And for different cities, they've got different problems. So over in Melbourne, for example, I know that David at the City of Literature office is often out there thinking about how to send writers abroad to experience other cultures and the way that other writing communities operate, because that's harder to do from here. Whereas from Edinburgh, it's 4 hours on the train to London, so it's quite easy. So really each city thinks about how does it make literature visible and relevant to its population, and how does it think about literature as a tourism draw in its own context. So it's super interesting.
So you're talking about making reading or writing visible and tangible. And
Yeah.
that's very much what Australia Reads is about as well. It's about the intangible impact of reading, but making it tangible and making it real. Now, a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is a very large study that Australia Reads conducted looking at the reading habits of Australians. What was it that first motivated you to undertake this study?
I think it's part to do with the fact that I have spent the last 20 years running all kinds of literary festivals and engagements. And I have watched other incredible colleagues in different countries and organizations do the same. And still, we look at the international readership figures, and across the Western world in particular, but fairly consistently around the world, we see engagement with reading dropping. And in particular, in Australia, we have seen a pretty speedy drop amongst, so all age groups have dropped their frequency and how much they read here in Australia and how often. But the teenage age group has dropped faster. So it has dropped from, in 2017, 22% of Australian secondary students didn't read a book in a year. And that had become 29% just 5 years later. That's a 7% increase in non-reading in a relatively short period of time. And so looking around at that, all the passionate work that happens, and yet still these numbers are dropping, we've got to take a different approach. So that has very much driven me and my colleagues in our partner organizations to think about, we have to do something fairly transformational. We have to use different techniques than we've historically used to turn this decline around. And that's where we have been working with behavioral scientists and psychologists to think about how we change behavior. Because saying things like, you should read, reading's amazing, reading's good for you, doesn't work. It's a little bit like saying, eat your vegetables. We need to show it. We need to make it visible. We need to make it fun. We need to make it very easy for people to engage wherever they're at. We need to be very careful of shaming them for not reading enough, which we do accidentally sometimes. So this kind of driving force around turning around these reading statistics is where I'm really coming from. And this report is our kind of beginning at how we use techniques that other industries use all the time, because they have a lot more cash than us. If we think about the fossil fuel industry, or we think about fast food is an interesting industry to look at, because they came up with the reduce, reuse, recycle originally, because they want to make recycling an individual responsibility, not a corporate responsibility. So the language they use, the way that we think about how we encourage people to act, there's a science behind it, and we can learn those techniques and apply them in the book world. And I'm confident that we can turn those numbers around reading rates.
Well, before we get into the solutions, I want to spend a little bit of time looking at what the obstacles are, at what the problems are. So you were fairly confident that you knew some of the results that were going to come out of Australia Reads, that there would be a decline in reading because this is mapped across the Western world,
Yeah.
or the speaking world. Did anything surprise you? Shock you?
Oh, lots. It's been really interesting. I think the first thing I heard when I took on Australia Reads had already sort of like the umbrella name and the organizations behind it had already come together. And so I came in when that beautiful visual design that Beck Fainer, the illustrator, has done for us, that was already in place. And I got the opportunity to say, okay, well, what do we need? And I just kept hearing the word research constantly, but people had different interpretations of what that meant in terms of research. And so some of that is the research into what are the obstacles and the problems. Some of that is the research into what are the benefits, what are the joys that come from reading, what's out there already in terms of international research. Let's not reinvent the wheel here. And some of it was just people want really shiny, sharp, snappy statistics that they can go off and use with their partners and in their funding applications and with their local governments. And so we kind of needed a bit of a mix. And so when we kind of did that first catch, we did a research review first, a literature review really, to see what was out there. And that's really where our research falls into those problems and barriers and those benefits. And the benefits are, you know, we've got actual stats from academic and peer-reviewed studies all around the world that show us that reading helps us sleep better. It helps us live longer. It helps anxiety and depression, because in part it helps us to concentrate and slow down, which genuinely brings your blood pressure down. And that can help with anxiety, not a replacement for proper mental health treatment, but it can certainly be a support mechanism. It reduces loneliness. So readers, particularly readers with low vision, feel much more connected by having access to stories. And it helps us bond with those around us. It helps us be more empathetic. Apparently, we are 58% more culturally tolerant of others if we read on a regular basis, which is classed as 30 minutes a week. So all of these wonderful kind of illuminations that we already know in our hearts, reading is good, but to be able to quantify it for those people who we need to convince, who have control of investment, we need to explain it and talk about it in a different way. So I think some of those studies, the numbers were a little bit more profound than I thought they were going to be, Andrew. So the Scholastic study that shows that's about children and parents reading is both beautiful and a little heartbreaking, and that 86% of children aged 6 to 17, so all the way up to teenagerhood, wish that their parents still read with them because it's a special experience. So it's not just that they're enjoying the content of the book, it's not just that the book helps them think about complex topics differently, it's that they appreciate the family time. And it looks different for different age groups. You might have middle grade children doing the reading out loud to the parent. You might just be reading the same book at the same time with your older children. But that shared experience is really valuable. And I always knew that, but I didn't know it. It makes a difference knowing how important and having some facts behind it. On the problem side, I think it's been really nice to do this research to give us a succinct way to talk about the barriers, because what's not surprising is that people come back and go, oh, screens are involved in this story about why reading rates have been dropping, but they're not the whole story and they're not the devil. And we have to be careful not to demonize screens, because screens are great ways to discover new reads. They're great ways to read ebooks. They're great ways to transport ebooks. But we can do it in a yes and model. Yes, that's a great way to read. And here's some other great ways to read. And so looking at the barriers, they fall into three main areas, all the different barriers that get in the way. They are either to do with capability. So do people actually have the technical skills to read? And do they have the confidence to read? So that's both those things come under capability. So the capability, the technical skill of reading, literacy, 44% of Australians struggle with literacy, which is a shocking number, but pretty similar to other Western nations. Scotland is 46%, for example. And that's been fairly static for 20 years. And literacy is a sliding scale. It's also a use it or lose it skill. You have to practice it to keep it up. So on that sliding scale, there's everything from what we immediately think about when we say illiterate is totally cannot read anything. The letters on the page are squiggles, to could read a menu in a cafe, maybe not a Melbourne cafe, but a standard cafe, could read a menu in a cafe, but couldn't read a medicine bottle. And so if you think about how that helps you participate in the world, particularly how digital can't do a Centrelink form, like it really is looking at participation in society. It's stopping people. So that's a really high number for a well-off country like Australia. So, and then the confidence side of things. If people aren't used to reading, if they aren't used to seeing other people reading, if they don't know how to behave in a bookshop, if they don't know the etiquette of a library, They're not going to want to go into those places. They're not going to want to interact with books. The confidence is way lower. That was a real surprise, Andrew. A lot of people are a lot less confident with books than those of us who are around books all the time and talk to each other all the time would imagine. So that was fairly surprising. On the nice side, more people wanted to read more often than I expected. So half of people who read and half of people who don't read really wanted to read more often. So that people who don't read wanting to read more often is a wonderful thing for us, because we've already got them over the why bother. Like they already know it's probably going to be good. We just got to help them with the other barriers. So there's other two buckets that all the barriers fall into. We've got capability, we've got opportunity, and we've got motivation. So opportunity is, oh, I feel like reading. Is it easy for me in that moment to get hold of a book? Can I listen to an audiobook quickly? Can I get something from my library app on my phone? Is there a book literally in my school, on my bus, in my shopping center that I can get my hands on? So have I got the access? If I'm a small person, is someone stopping me from getting access? Am I allowed to choose the book I want to read and not something that someone else wants me to read? That autonomy of choice, really critical. And for younger people in particular, they can get put off really easily by the raised eyebrow, by the, oh, you want to read that? That can be a real confidence sapper for them, and they might not come back. So we've got the opportunity, and then we've got motivation. Am I in the mood to read? What do I feel like reading? A lot of people didn't know how to choose a book. So, and the prevailing kind of information and trends about reading out there, and all ways that we choose to spend our time, are that our current society has less tolerance for risk. So we are not risking things that we aren't already confident we're going to enjoy. And that's not just the book world. So the music world is seeing that. So I'm okay. Like people are okay to spend $1,200 on a Taylor Swift ticket because they know they love it, but they're not going to spend $50 on a gig at a local pub for 5 bands they've never heard of, because they're not just spending the money, they're spending the time, and they see the time expense. And so they say, oh, well, I've never heard of them. If I don't like it, I've wasted 2 hours. I'm not comfortable. And it goes in the too hard basket. So how we make reading feel really approachable, and help people see that there's a book for every mood. Yep, that book isn't for you. That's okay. There's another book, and it will make you feel a different way. And that's all right. And I think there's great opportunities for writers in the book world to think about how we show people that the reading experience can be so many different things, and there is a way to be a reader that can be for them. It doesn't have to be high literature. It doesn't have to be 4 hours a day. It can just be something that you enjoy, that's really commercial, that suits your interests.
Or a Melbourne cafe menu, as the case may be.
I mean, you could be there for a good 20 minutes sometimes with some of these menus at the moment. Yeah.
One of the things that really interested me about the survey and the research is that you broke the reader down into market segments, which has been done, and you also referenced that you want the reading and the writing industry to sort of work on the backs of others who have had the money to actually do these research. And one of the, obviously the most famous market segment probably in this country is the grey nomad, which was, you know, from the tourism sector, described a group of people. And so in the Australia Reads research, there's aspirational, there's avid, there's uninterested or non-interested, but there's also the lapsed reader, which I think is a really interesting thing. Could you just sort of, building on what you've just said about the capability, the confidence, the opportunity, and the motivation, what is the picture of a typical lapsed reader?
Yeah. So there are 6 segments, and I see that the link is already in the chat. And if you want to jump straight to the segments, they start on page 21 of the report. The 6 segments just briefly are, so we start with avid and engaged readers. They're reading pretty frequently. We don't really have any problems, especially with avid readers, but that's where all our marketing dollars goes as an industry, is into avid readers, but we've sort of almost saturated that market. Then we've got our engaged readers, our aspirational readers who want to read more but get easily distracted and have got a lot going on. Our ambivalent readers are fascinating, and we might get to them because they don't know if they like reading, but they do it, but they're not sure what they like. They do like audiobooks. And then we've got, so there's four of the six segments, four do read and two don't read. And they split into two. They split into this lapsed reader that you mentioned, Andrew, and the uninterested non-reader. Now, our uninterested non-readers, they're going to be the hardest group to tackle, and we're thinking about them further down the track, because they are frustrated, angry, confused by the reading experience. Why would you? I'm sure we all know someone who's like, why would you read? We're going to have to think about how we tackle them and approach them very differently from some of these other groups. The lapsed readers, however, think really fondly about books. They have good, they know that reading is great. They are likely to read to other people. So they might read to a parent, or they might read to their children. But that doesn't mean that they describe themselves as a reader. So it's almost like they don't see themselves as a reader, even though they're reading to someone else. But the biggest difference, so we call them the forgotten book lover. Like, they do love books. They remember them really fondly. Just somehow life's got in the way, and it's years since they picked one up. So we've got an opportunity to approach them, because the biggest difference between them and the uninterested non-readers is that the lapsed readers can remember a positive experience with a book as a child. The uninterested non-readers cannot remember one single positive experience with books at all in their life. Now, this doesn't mean to say that they haven't had one, but they can't remember it. They have no perception of it. So it talks to, for those of, I see there's a couple of people here who work with younger readers. Those early reading experiences are critical, because it's going to be very hard to reach the uninterested readers. Whereas the lapsed readers, there they are. They're actually, they want our help. They want us to meet them where they're at. And they want us to help them read. And Andrew Ritchie, who works in marketing in the book world, has described this as the lapsed readers aren't quite ready to run a marathon. For them, just putting their trainers on is going to be a really big step forward. So if we try and think about what that means in a book world, I'm not going to expect them to start reading 3 books a year. But if I could help them learn the skill of how to find the kind of book that they love, and then they go on to read 1 or even 2 books a year, that's a wonderful thing. We've made enormous progress. And so if we could get these people who don't read, it's about, overall across all the categories, it's about a third of Australians didn't read a book in the last 12 months. If we could get all of them to buy 1 more book a year, that is, I think that comes in as about, it's 20 million. No, it's one third of 21 million. So it's about 7 or 8 million extra book sales. So it's an enormous potential that we can get them to do that. But we have to break it down for them. We have to make it really approachable, really straightforward. And the way that once you get stuck into the report, into that research, you'll see that we've broken it down is across the reading journey. So there are 6 steps across the reading journey, because reading isn't just that moment where you open the book and absorb the squiggles. It is the whole process of, how do you even find the book? How do you know how to choose what's for you? How do you then find the moment to start reading? How do you stay in the concentration headspace of keeping on reading? And then how do you talk and share with books with others? And so there's the kind of 6 phases of the reading journey. And how we approach them will be different at each stage. So for the lapsed readers, many of them reported not knowing how to choose a book. So that's probably an early step, because you can't start reading if you haven't chosen one. So if we want to attract our lapsed readers, we've got to be thinking about, how are we going to help them find books? And for all our segments, but so including our lapsed readers, finding a genre that they love and are comfortable with is kind of the number one motivator for them. And finding an author that they're familiar with, and that they're comfortable with was really important. So barriers different for every group. Yeah.
Is there something within the lapsed readers that sort of broke that ability? Because obviously at one point they were able to either find or be given a book that suited them. Is there something in their journey or in their experience that stop that? Was it the end of school? Is that when people tend to sort of fall off, or do you have any insight into that?
Broadly speaking, so not just for the lapsed readers, but broadly speaking, we've always seen what the many educators call the summer slump. So age 14, 15, we definitely see people move away from books. We're starting to see that slump happen around age 7 as well in the middle grade market, which is very concerning. And then there's also in later life, those who have children and caring responsibilities in addition to children caring for children responsibilities, that sandwich generation, find it difficult to find the time. So the kind of common factors that have changed over the last 10 or 20 years are to do with fragmentation of attention spans, increased work and for student sports and extracurricular activities and tutoring. There's an increased load there, which impacts parents as well as young people, and distraction for other things. So people are choosing other entertainment forms, or they're just being completely distracted. For the lapsed readers in particular, they report wanting shorter books. They find, with the way that brains, attention spans and brains are changing, they find a really big, thick wodge of a book when they haven't read for a year really confronting. So shorter books with punchy openings really help. Recommendations from family and friends are really important. Word of mouth, incredibly important, because they trust the people around them to know what they like and know how they'll want to spend their time. So that means the word of mouth recommendation is more important than ever. And so I think these kind of big themes, Andrew, about our fragmented attention spans, feeling like we don't have enough time, feeling like we've guilty because we should be doing the cleaning or picking the kids up from school or taking the dog for a walk and not sitting selfishly and reading a book for ourselves. And so we need to change that thought process around it's not, don't feel guilty. You're getting all these incredible health benefits and family and social benefits by doing that reading, whether alone or with the rest of the family. So the time one is really interesting because we actually have more time than we've ever had. We just don't perceive that we've got the time because we're getting it in little fragments. We're getting 20 minutes here, half an hour there. So it's changing the perception of, I need an hour before I can really sit down and get into a book. And if I don't have that hour in my schedule, I'm not going to do it. Whereas we can say, no, it's okay. Just start for 20 minutes and see how you go. Or help people make a habit. So how do we help people form a habit so that, okay, you try reading before bed and the book falls on your face because you get one page in and that, you're not really having a good experience. You fall asleep. Great that it's helping you sleep, but maybe we can find, maybe you're a morning person and actually maybe blocking out half an hour in the morning with your coffee before the rest of the household wakes up. Maybe that's the best habit for you. That's the way you can form your daily reading habit. So there's lots of techniques we could use. What we have to do is really target them to the different groups, because what is going to work for avid readers will probably backfire with these other groups. And what works for the lapsed readers is not enough for the avid readers because they're already there. They're ahead of us.
They're already there.
So, yeah.
You've mentioned children and young people a lot. And in an earlier conversation, you were talking about two key points of someone who is 3 and someone who is 7 as great indicators as to where they're going to be within your market segment. I wonder if you can just talk about that.
Yeah, so there's if we look across all the different studies, and we can start to stitch some of them, what we learn from each of them together. So we know from very well documented, very extensive population-wide surveys about how children are doing with literacy and reading around age 7. We know that the education system teaches formal training more or less until you hit the age of 7. From the age of 7 onwards, the education system kind of assumes you can read, and it's all about improving your reading and your vocabulary and your experience. But you might not have hit that point. You might not actually be able to read at that point. So 7 is an important number from a kind of literacy training perspective. And then there are studies that show us that if a child can name their favorite book at the age of 3, they are more likely to be able to read at that crucial point of 7 or 8. So, and then if they can read well around the ages of 7 or 8, it's very well documented that they get better life outcomes, more stable, more secure, more successful as modern society sees it. So, getting to that point at 7 is really important. But this research at the age of 3 gives us an early indicator. Now, pretty sure a 3-year-old will tell you 10 different favorite books within a 2-hour period. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the answer is. The matter is they understand the question. So this opportunity to kind of put early learning at the heart of what we do is really important. But the way that that actually works is if the adult and the adults around them are reading. They're either reading to the child or they are modeling enjoyment in reading themselves. So if a child can see that the parent chooses to sit and read, then they are seeing that they value reading, and they perceive that reading is valuable. And that comes, we've got some deep in the appendices of our report, we've got some materials about the importance of seeing others around you do something and the value that you place on it. So we do have an opportunity, but we do have to target the adults as well as the children in order to get that behavioral change.
Yeah. In behavioral change, how fluid are these groups? How easily do people move from avid down to engaged, or from aspirational up to engaged?
Mm. It's totally fluid over a person's lifespan. So particularly if they have those other responsibilities, what's interesting is looking at what's likely to make them come back. So if someone is in the lapsed reader category, they are more likely to become an avid reader at a point in their life that suits them better than the uninterested non-readers who have this real mental block about reading for various reasons. So if we can ensure people can remember the positive experience, they are likely to come back to it. And it's really helpful, I think, for us to think about the fact that it's not linear. Like, I don't read anywhere as much as I did when I was about 16. And I long for the moment when I can read 10 books a week again, but I'm just not there at the moment. So I'm probably in the aspirational or the engaged categories at the moment, having been an avid reader all my life. So I think that there's hope in, and helps us take the pressure off to say, okay, that's where you're at the moment. You're not reading as much, but we can help you read more often that suits your lifestyle. So that fluidity is a good thing. I would say the avid readers and the non-interested readers at the two ends of the pipeline are probably the most fixed, whereas these categories in between, we've got the opportunity to influence how much they read. Yeah.
One of the groups that sort of has, I think, risen to prominence, and they factor more heavily into one, is men. That men have a problem reading, and again, in earlier discussions, we were talking about someone who is a writer, is a male writer, who just said don't read and will never read again. Where where is this experience in the reality of the world, and do you see that in the research?
First of all, many millions of men do read.
Yes.
So let's put that one right up front. The perception question is interesting that quote comes from, because if we keep saying things like that, they become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And they're not true. There are millions of readers of all genders. What we do need, however, is to ensure that reading is a social norm. So a social norm is something that people value. Of course, of course, reading is valuable. And the more people that don't participate in reading, the more likely it is that it becomes a social norm to not read. So that's a tipping point that we very much want to stay away from. We want it to be socially normal and valuable as a society that we read. And so how that looks different for different people. And we have to show different reading role models. We have to show comfort with different kinds of genres of reading. We have to not stigmatize different types of formats or genres, and show that everyone can be a reader, and lower the bar for what that interpretation is of what a reader is, because we are I'm assuming everybody here is a reader, and we all are completely different, and we look completely different, and we act completely different, and we read completely different things. And so I think the gender question is one that actually we're going to take a look at over the next couple of months in a bit more of a deep dive, because it comes up a lot and there's been a lot in the press this year about gender and reading. We need to show that men read. We need to make it visible without making it a hoo-ha. Like it just has to be a normal, important activity to see the rugby player reading, but not just celebrities, because the most influential people are the people around you, the adults around you that you respect. So in a workplace, whenever they want, in a workplace, change management communications is all to change behavior, is all to do with where the message comes from. So companies that kind of are applying the science would get the CEO to tell you a message of our company is going to change what we're doing, and then they get your direct manager. And they're the two voices. You need to hear it from the top, the celebrity, and then you need to hear it from the people around you to really trust the message. And that's not just the very important teacher librarians and the educators and the authors. That's the PE teacher. That's the scout leader. That's the nippers coach. So that's how we normalize kind of the reading experience across society. It's not necessarily always an easy thing to do to get behavior change at population level, but that's kind of the mission that we're on, and make sure that we give space and visibility to those conversations and those different types of readers.
Right. We want to, before we get into some of the solutions or areas for hope and optimism, just a reminder to people to, if you do have questions that you'd like to put to Anna, just put them into the chat and we will have time to get to them. Before we get to the things, audiobooks and ebooks, where do audiobooks fit within? Obviously, part of the publishing industry, they're huge. Where do they fit within the research to the actual positive benefits of reading? Does one map onto the other, or is there a difference?
There is I mean, broadly, they correlate, but there are differences. So we at Australia Reads have a really broad definition of reading, and we include ebooks, audiobooks, graphic novels, all within that definition of reading. So when I have said the word read at any point today, I also mean read or listen. And that's in our research as well. It's read or listen to a book in 12 months. And so the print book is where you get the most benefits. The research backs this up. It is easier, recall decreases if you're reading on a screen. So you still get most of the same benefits, but it's a little harder to remember and to keep the information, especially if you're reading nonfiction, imprinted. And then audiobooks, incredibly valuable, incredibly popular, huge growth. More than a third of Australians have listened to an audiobook in the last year. That's growing exponentially. We expect it to continue to grow at stratospheric levels over the next few years. Globally, this is a trend. What you get is you don't quite get some of the concentration benefits, but you get the vocabulary benefits, you get the social understanding, you get the opportunity to have heard from characters from different voices and perspectives and narrators. So you get many of those understandings. And there is research from Oxford University that talks about vocabulary and speech. When we talk to one another, we don't use the same kind of language. When you listen to the radio, they're not using the same kind of language as a written book, whereas written text in the form of a fiction, long form fiction or nonfiction, read aloud, you're still getting all the benefits of the vocabulary. Like we don't say, or I wouldn't say anyway, in this kind of setting, and I gasped in awe. But I might see something like that. I might talk about how my plant has variegated leaves. If I'm writing it down, I'm not going to say that in the pub. So we can still pick up a lot of the linguistic and social benefits of reading from audio, and it is an important way in for people. And I think that as a result, they're increasingly important to the book world.
The the rise of the audiobook and your prediction that the audiobook is going to be an even more important part of the market. What sort of advice would you give to writers who are publishing or talking to publishers or maybe even looking at independent publishing? Where does the audiobook fit within that?
Oh, I think recognizing it is a good thing. One of the things when I've worked with early career authors who are presenting their work, whether that is for recording or at festival or a presentation, I am very keen on thinking very much about practice, because reading your work aloud is a completely different experience, both for you as the author and for the audience as the listener. Um, and so I used to do a training program in Edinburgh for debut authors. They would get to read their work at the Edinburgh International Book Festival as local authors. We'd have one a day. So I had a cohort of 17 every year. We did performance coach training, acting training with them, not to turn them into actors, but because when you read the words, you have to give them color and life and meaning. That's if you're reading your own work. I mean, it's just really helpful for festivals and school visits and anytime you're kind of interacting with a readership, to know and understand how to read your passages is an important skill, and it's different from writing them. But if you're talking with a publisher about audiobooks, they've probably got an actor in mind that would be doing the reading, who is trained in that particular skill. But you can make that part of the conversation. Are they thinking about audiobooks? I think publishers are thinking about audiobooks, and they're trying to think about production levels. So there are some books that will lend themselves to quite a high production value. And if you want to look at what's currently out in the market, the Australian Book Industry Awards awards an audiobook of the year each year. And you can go and have a look at the shortlists for those. That's ABIA, ABIA, Australian Book Industry Awards. And the shortlists are quite interesting because they've changed a lot over the last few years. So a couple of years ago, it was Shang Lu's Whitewash, and that had a cast of 26 people. It was basically an enormous radio play. Other books are one reader, very lo-fi. And so the publishers are trying to work out how much they invest. How many of these larger productions will they do? How many of the smaller productions will they do? That's all part of the kind of, if you get to the point of having an agent or you're in contractual conversations, you can talk all that through with your publisher around where the audiobook book fits as a specific piece.
Does the audiobook sort of fit more closely to one of the market groups, to one of the cohorts
So
that it,
probably ambivalent readers. I mean, everyone, not so much the avid, and again, not looking at the two outlier groups, those four groups in the middle. They all love audiobooks, totally growing for everyone. But the ambivalent readers in particular, who are fascinating because they don't know what they like, which means we have opportunity to introduce them to new things. They very much more prefer audiobooks, and there are more men in that group. So I haven't drawn any correlations, and our researchers haven't drawn any deep connection there, but it's a fact. There's more men, and they like audiobooks more in that particular segment. And so we've got in the report, we've got more depth about how you might talk to that kind of reader. What are they interested in? And one that comes up again and again is a really punchy opening. So I've spoken to a load of publishers about some of these findings, and the editors are all like nodding and thinking, okay, we think about that anyway, but now we've got heightened importance on how we have a really appealing, short, punchy opening that doesn't use too many big words and is really accessible for a lot of people and would read well in audio. And that's how you're going to approach that group.
Before moving off audiobooks, Ron from the audience does have a rather interesting question on multitasking. If you're listening to a book and you're driving, are you reading?
I think you're reading an audiobook. I think we need to expand our definition of reading and what a reader is.
So you're not so you're not putting, you said earlier, like, people wanted to set aside like half an hour of
Yep.
concentrated time. That's not so. You don't have to just sit on a couch with a set of headphones on.
No, go for a walk. Go for a walk with the dog. Listen while you're driving. We've heard there's a really great I can't remember who's doing it, but there's a group of truckers and they listen long distance and are in a book club. And it's just brilliant. Because then they can, drive for 4 hours and probably get quite a long way through that story and talk about it with others. So it's all good, really. It's all good work. one of the reasons why, yeah, the concentration thing isn't quite the same is because you often do use audiobooks while doing something else. So sometimes you have to focus slightly more on the driving than the plot, but it's still there. It's still taking you with you on the journey. So it's still a good thing.
Which I think sort of reinforces your idea of that punchiness, of that ability for the book to break through the other thing that you are doing to bring itself back up to prominence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question coming in from the audience. Judith says, what about things such as highly publicized like citywide readathons, and programs that you sometimes see in school libraries or across the state? Yeah.
One of the things we're calling for is a national reading strategy at a national level, and that the state governments come on board with, because what we need is a mix of these kinds of campaigns and interventions, because some of them will work really well. Thinking, something like the Premier's Reading Challenge, that works really well for avid reader children. It works a lot less well for uninterested readers, and in fact can backfire and entrench in them the feeling that reading's not for them. So having one initiative, it's any investment in reading is a good thing, but we need a whole suite of different kinds of campaigns. And we're kind of putting together at the moment what we're calling the reading recipe, which is the sort of the key design considerations. For example, autonomous choice, being able to choose what book you read is important. So we're kind of putting those principles together, but visibility is a really big one. And we ran the One Book, One Edinburgh campaign for 5 years, and it did so well. It was such a fun campaign to run. The whole city got involved. You knew it was on, even if you were a visitor. It was just brilliant. We also gave away 35,000 free books a year, and yet 6 different editions of the same book were in the top 10 for months. So people bought it as well as got it from the library and got free copies. So they can be incredibly fun and engaging. They make it fun. They make it a low barrier to entry. But we need the whole gamut, because otherwise we're only going to appeal to people who already love this stuff. And we have to really think about how we reach beyond our usual bookish spaces.
Yeah, because one of the first things that you said was that nearly all the marketing budget goes towards the avid reader or the top 2 cohorts.
Yeah.
Let's imagine that a dream comes true. The national reading strategy is up and running. An enormous bucket of money has been dumped at your doorstep.
Thanks,
Uh,
Andrew.
yeah, no, that's all right. It's in the post, as they
Yeah.
say. What program do you want to run?
I think it's become very clear to me over the last couple of years, because I've been asked this question since I started, and I have been the person who's gone, let's just wait until I've got more data from these behavioral scientists that we're working with. But it's become increasingly apparent to me that some form of shared family reading program is very necessary in this country, and how we use the techniques of public health campaigning to design that campaign, so that it is not about read and it's not aimed at avid readers. It is actually about lapsed readers who are parents, lapsed readers who care for older adults, ambivalent readers who don't know what they like and don't respond to the usual marketing approaches. These are the people that we need to target. And one of the opportunities you just asked about, discussions with publishers and authors, one of the opportunities in the industry is to use these segments as a common language. So to be able to, for publishers to be able to say to, for example, Booktopia, this is a book that's aimed at the ambivalent reader. These are the barriers we need to overcome with ambivalent readers. So this is how we're going to market this book together to sell more of it to people who don't traditionally buy many books a year. So that we've got that opportunity between writers, publishers, booksellers, librarians to have the conversation about how particular titles tackle those barriers. And then at the same time, we can have that bigger structural conversation about how do we market reading itself to those groups rather than just the individual books. So I definitely want a shared family reading campaign. But Sweden has just announced last year 10.8 million euros into a young adults reading campaign. France, Germany, and Spain Spain, and Italy all run cultural voucher programs that give under 25s a voucher to go and spend on any cultural activity. Between 70 and 80% of that money of those vouchers get spent on books by those cohorts. And Italy is a really interesting case study because they just rolled back the provision. Only some young adults are get it now, and the number and the conversations about reading have plummeted. So they're trying to argue for that program to be reinstated. So there's other countries that do bits of it really well. The Scandi countries are charging ahead. Singapore is investing millions of dollars into the social norm style advertising. So public campaigns about reading is great, but not saying those words. We need to show that it's great using sneaky Machiavellian advertising techniques. So other countries we can learn from, but we want the whole suite, Andrew. So if you've got $20 or $30 million, I reckon we could get 3 or 4 really good campaigns going.
I've only got the one bucket. Sorry, that's all. That's all I've got. I'm not quite sure how much I can fit into it. Just before we get to the final questions, Pam has asked, which demographic is most represented in the avid readers? Is that?
I've had to go and have a bit of a look because we've got so many tables in the report and we've broken everything down so many different ways. Like we've broken it down by what emotions does each group most likely to associate with reading, as well as the sort of demographic information. Avid readers, from memory, rather than being able to look at the exact table, fairly broad, more likely to be aged 25 plus. But that all the age groups. This report was 16 plus, so we have to study under 16s differently. But this still tells us how we work with the families, parents, and carers around them. I think there's fairly sure that there is quite a lot more older people who are retired because they overcome the time barrier. So there's definitely an kind of a retirement representation in the avid reader group that's there.
Yeah. What has been the response of organisations, government or otherwise, that you've shown this research to?
Fantastic, and a really fantastic international response. So the UK and Singapore have both written to us to say, you're ahead of the game. We don't have this. Is it applicable to our community? So we've been talking to them about how that looks, because a lot of what we do internationally is based on we see a need, we try and fill it. We've actually said, right, before we do that, we're going to do this science piece so we can, if we only have $50,000, we target it at the most effective place. And so the next bit that we've had a huge amount of media coverage, which is great because it helps us with our advocacy to government for further investment. Creative Australia has heard us, and they are working now with us and with the behavioral scientist Behaviour Works. We're actually testing 8 reading initiatives to target those 4 segments from lapsed to engaged at the different reading stages to see which of these kinds of programs are most likely to work and which one should we try first. So we've got that on the go in the background at the moment, and I'm looking forward to seeing the first cut of that at the end of this month. So we'll probably unveil that early next year.
So keep an eye on the Australia Reads website for it. Okay, so we are rapidly running out of time. 2 last questions. What are you reading now? What's the last book you finished?
Oh, okay. Well, the last book I finished was Nevermore by Jessica Townsend, which I thoroughly enjoyed because I really love middle grade fantasy fiction. So, I have been 61%, according to my ebook register, of the way through Ghost Cities by Shang Lu. So that's where I'm at the moment. But I did put a couple of books down recently because Monday was the Prime Minister's Literary Awards, and the first time I've ever heard an arts minister quote a picture book. So I had to put things down and read the picture books from the shortlist, which are gorgeous and beautiful. And then Christmas, I'm behind the times. Christmas, I've got earmarked for Juice, because like many of our infrequent readers, it's a bit overwhelming looking. That is a substantial book. So it might have been out for over a year, but I'm going to catch up this Christmas.
It's good to dream. It's good to dream. Yes. Okay. Okay, we do have one very last question from Denise, and then we're going to have to back it up. It is generally, what is the demographic makeup of the undercapitalized markets? Which is, I think, sort of similar to a question you've already asked, so it's quite broad.
Yeah, demographic questions are hard to answer because we need to know what we're trying to understand by that, which is why there are about 4 different tables in the appendices that sort of answer that question. Like, are we looking at cultural background, age, socioeconomic influence, where what languages they speak at home. There's a whole different ways you can cut it. So that's why I can't give you a super easy answer. And it is why it is a mix. Yeah, so I'm afraid I'm going to direct you to have a bit of a look. Thank you very much from the Writing New South Wales team who has gone and had a look at some of the demographics. They're all in there.
Yes, yes. But anyway, that is, we do have both Sophie and Annabelle are absolutely fantastic on the searching and the posting. Very good. But that's all we have time for. Thank you everyone here with us today. It's great to see so many people online and the questions coming in. Heartfelt thanks to you, Anna, for sharing both your experience and your knowledge and expertise with us here today. And I do implore everyone to actually go to the Australia Reads website, read it. It is a fascinating document. There's even an executive summary for those who are in the time poor or who are in the ambivalent group, if not the lapsed. If you're not already subscribed to Newsbite, which is our weekly email newsletter that lets you know when events such as this are taking place, as well as all the services we offer, please do so. The details are on our website again. Thank you again, Anna, and I hope to see all of you at the next one. And I wish all of you a good weekend, and in New South Wales, a very good long weekend. So farewell and thank you.
Thanks for having me, everyone.